The Forward Party is a political party I've been hearing about more and more recently. Its purpose is to provide an alternative to Democrats and Republicans for US voters who feel that politics has become far too factionalized in their country. In this video, I'm going to break down the pros and cons and then give my thoughts. So before I begin, let me just state that in the United States, you guys have a congressional system of government, whereas in Canada, we have a parliamentary system of government. Now, if you don't know what the difference between these two styles of government are, just for the purposes of this video, the only distinction that I'll provide is that the parliamentary style of government is usually more effective at passing legislation, whereas the congressional style of government is usually more democratic. So I think most countries around the world have adopted a parliamentary system of government for the reason that it's a bit more effective in passing legislation. So let's just get right into the pros. Now, in the United States, you already sort of do have a third option. It's called the Independent Party. The problem with the Independent Party is two things. The first is that in the Independent Party, they're not on the ballot on every single state. In other words, depending on the state you live in, you literally are unable to vote independent, which means that they have no real pathway to victory as far as the presidency is concerned. Number two, the Independent Party, it's a sort of umbrella term for all sorts of parties, right? The Independent Party is a sort of funnel for all sorts of different ideologies that might go into it. So, for example, you can have an independent, elected official who's both a communist, and at the same time, you can have another independent elected who's a libertarian. So the problem with the Independent Party is that it's quite literally just this gigantic, broad party that says if you're not part of the Republican or Democratic Party, any ideology you have, no matter how opposing or how different, you're technically an independent, right? So there's no focus in that party. Now, the Forward Party is quite different. It's a little bit more closely modeled after a normal formal party, in that the Forward Party has certain ideologies, and only people who perhaps agree or relate with those ideologies would fit into the Forward Party. So, in other words, it's a party that's meant to attract voters, a specific kind of voter, just like the Democratic Party, just like the Republican Party. Now, the pros of a third party like the Forward Party is that it would ultimately seek to siphon voters from the Republicans and siphon voters from the Democrats. And the way it would do this is that it would be a sort of custom mix and match fit into the party. So let's say you're a conservative, you agree with the conservatives on perhaps a lot of the social issues, but you disagree with them on some of the economic issues. However, because the social issues are very important to you, you feel that you have no choice in voting Republican, so you keep going Republican. Well, the Forward Party would now potentially present you with an opportunity to vote Forward Party that's a lot more representative of your views. And it's the same thing on the left. Let's say you're left because of the economic issues, but you heavily disagree with the social issues with the Democratic Party. But because the economic issues are very important to you, you're stuck, with the Democratic Party. So, for example, let's say you want healthcare for all, right? But you disagree with a lot of the social issues that the Democrats are putting forward. Well, the Republicans really aren't offering healthcare for all, so you're stuck with the Democratic Party, even though you disagree. Excuse me, even though you disagree with them on a number of social issues. Well, now the Forward Party would be a very attractive party to you. So again, what the Forward Party ultimately seeks to do is to siphon those voters. And there's, I suppose, one or two positives here, right? The first positive is the same thing that I already said, that it's meant to give people an alternative that better represents their views. But the second positive that it actually has for the system as a whole is that when the Republicans and the Democrats begin to see that, hey, we're actually losing voters to the Forward Party, that the Forward Party, this third party, is gaining in popularity, what it's going to force them to do is it's going to force them to abandon, I suppose, some of their far right or far left elements. So in the far left, for example, and or the Democratic Party, being encouraged to go more and more further left when it comes to social issues. And again, like, just full disclosure, on economic issues, I'm a leftist. On social issues, I'm a conservative. So you understand, like, the second you hear that, you understand there's no real political party for me, right? Like, at least the libertarians, they're hardcore right on economic issues and very left leaning on social issues. So there's a group for them. I'm sort of the opposite of a libertarian in that I'm economically left, but socially conservative. So there's not really a party out there for me that's viable in any way if I were a US citizen. But anyway, so with a third party, with a third party like the Forward Party, the Democrats would have to realize, okay, some of these hardline, stances we're taking on these social issues, we're gonna have to start coming a little bit more toward the center, a little bit more toward the middle. So, for example, transgender issues, uh, you know, biological men in female sports, stuff like that, that the overwhelming majority of the country opposes. The Democrats would have no choice but to start coming further right on some of those social issues. Why? Because the Forward Party is now beginning to steal a ton of their voters, a ton of their support, and they would have no choice but to try and regain that support. It's the same thing for the Republican side, right? The Republicans would realize that, hey, some of their hardline economic, or perhaps even some of their hardline social policies, right, is beginning to cost them votes to the Forward Party. The Forward Party is beginning to siphon votes and support from them, and then the Republicans would have to stop or have to abandon their continued track going further and further right and start pulling back and taking a bit more moderate stance on certain issues. Now, before I go further, I am not someone who believes that, having a moderate stance to every political issue is the right thing. There are some issues that I do not believe you can take a quote moderate stance. I remember when Hillary Clinton went out there and said, I am a moderate. That was the wrong political move. Aside from the fact that she was hated, the country, honestly, the whole world is in a situation right now where you need radical change. There is ultimately no room for moderates when it comes to this revolutionary style thinking. That being said, there are some issues that you need to be moderate on. Why? Because they affect people's day to day lives. So, social issues, for example, for me, fit into that. You're not going to come in and tell me, for example, that teachers can hide things about my children from me. The teachers can encourage my children that they're actually a boy or a girl, or encourage them to go seek whatever kind of, medical advice, or take whatever kind of medication to become a boy or a girl. Those are the kinds of things that are a hard line no. Those are the kinds of things that, we need to start moving away from as quickly as possible and back to the center, back to a place where it's like, no, we can't come in between families. But I'm going to ignore that for a moment and just get into it. So those are some of the pros of having a third party system, right? That it's a bit more democratic, and ultimately it forces the Democratic and Republican parties to come closer to the center so that the gap between their ideologies is not so vast, right? And it's not just about appealing to their far right or far left voter base, it's appealing to the majority of Americans. Those are some of the benefits of a third party. Now, let's get into the cons of a third party. The cons of a third party is that it actually might do the opposite. So, in order to have true representation, like in Canada, for example, we have 4, 5, even 6 political parties, okay? In order to have true representation, you're going to actually need more than the third party. You really need at least 4 parties or 5 parties, because when you have a third party, ultimately this is what you risk. What you risk is that third party siphoning a majority of voters from one political party and a minority of voters from the other political party. So let's just take an example. Let's say the Forward Party, gains national support, and it takes a majority of Republican voters, but a minority of Democratic voters, or vice versa. What that's going to do then is that the third party is not only never going to, win a national election, but they're also going to guarantee that one of the two existing parties always has an overwhelming advantage and basically is always the party that's going to be elected. What a third party can possibly risk is giving one of these two sides an overwhelming advantage and therefore allowing that side a full political monopoly. And that side would continue to go either further right or further left. So there are risks of a third party. But second, and I think this is also important because we saw this with, and by the way, the earlier point we saw with the George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton, right? A lot of people said that, look, George H.W. Bush would have beaten Bill Clinton had it not been for the third party candidate who essentially siphoned a lot of votes away from George H.W. Bush allowing Bill Clinton to win the presidency, right? So there is a precedent in history that a third party could potentially siphon votes away from one party more than the other, causing the political landscape to tilt in favor of one party versus the other. Now, I ultimately don't think a third party in the United States would actually work. The reason why I don't think it would work in the United States is because the United States is far too factionalized, right? It's not just the politics that are factionalized, it's the media that's factionalized, it's the sources of information that's factionalized. In my opinion, I think that although YouTube and online media has provided people with a way of seeking information that not gatekept or gate guarded by traditional media, it's also caused people to become more radical. Now, let's just take a look at some of the proposals of the third party. We'll just kind of go down here. Their website is forwardparty.com. It's given some examples of some individuals who've left either the Democratic or the Republican Party for the Forward Party in their states. In other words, to show you that they are gaining some traction. 60% of voters want a new political party. Come build with us. They break down their platform a little bit. Now, these are very general things like acts with ethics, integrity, and compassion. I mean, what does that really mean, right? Treats everyone with respect and dignity, individual liberty. Like, again, these are very, very general things. They don't really mean anything. Now, I don't think a third party would work in the United States. And the reason why I don't think so is because the United States is far too factionalized. And it's not just the politics that are factionalized, it's the media that's factionalized. And I'll get into that in a moment. But when you have a third party, and I was having this debate with a friend, it's ultimately, in a place like the United States, it ultimately becomes just a labeling context, right? Because you can't really avoid the label of conservative or liberal. You can't avoid being called conservative light or Republican light and Democratic light. It's not something you can avoid, and I'll show you. You have a third party. Well, the questions are immediately going to start. What's your stance on healthcare for all? You're either for it or you're against it. If you're for it, people are going to call you Democratic light. If you're against it, people are going to call you Republican light. What's your stance on abortion? Again, regardless of what your stance is, regardless of what the Forward Party puts forward, this is either a yes or no question. These are dichotomy questions. They're going to fit into one or the other. They're going to fit more left or they're going to fit more right. And once you get through enough of these fundamental issues, where do you stand on this? Where do you stand? Like, example, climate change. Where do you stand on climate change? Once you get through enough of these fundamental issues, people are ultimately going to fit you into a category. They're going to say, well, this is just a Republican Party that's not quite as conservative as the Republican Party. Immediately, what's going to happen? A lot of Democratic voters are going to avoid you. A lot of liberal voters may avoid you, right? And then what are you going to do? You're going to siphon voters exclusively from the Republicans and give Democrats an overwhelming lead. Or it'll be the other way around, where people are going to say, you know what? They agree with Democrats on climate change, on healthcare, on abortion, and on social issues like the trans issue, and et cetera, et cetera. They're basically Democratic light. Why would I vote for them? So what happens? The Forward Party siphons a majority of voters from the Democratic Party, giving the Republicans an overwhelming lead. I mean, a third party in the United States, I think at this point, is just a labeling issue. What you're doing is you're taking a new party, giving it a new label, and thinking that people are necessarily going to care. Once you start getting into the issues, the factionalized issue of are you left or right, that's now U.S. culture. You can't escape that. And once you start getting into the specific issues, are you left or right on this issue? Regardless of what your answer is, now they're going to consider you left or right on most issues. That's what the label they're going to give you. That's the propaganda that's going to come at the voter. And then the Forward Party is ultimately just going to be a meaningless party. Now, specifically in the United States, it's not just, as I said earlier, it's not just their politics that have become very factionalized. It's also their media that's become factionalized. And in part, this is because of online news networks or online news media. So I know that, YouTube and online media has been hailed as an achievement of democracy. It's been hailed as an achievement of, proof that the internet is a place of, free information that's easily accessible to all people and that it's helped inform, etc., etc. That's both true and untrue. Because unfortunately, when we have YouTube and you have the profit motive, remember we're in a capitalist system, guys. You can't avoid being in a capitalist system. We are in a capitalist system. Any YouTube channel that exists has the profit motive involved or included into it. And when you have the profit motive included into it, your number one goal becomes how can we get more viewers, right? And this, it's the same as the mainstream media. How can we get more viewers? You're going to pay attention to what your viewers respond to positively, and you're going to start moving more and more and more to the right, or more and more and more to the left in order to attract viewers. Why? So that you can continue to make more money. So unfortunately, when it comes to online media, when it comes to individuals, and by the way, for online media, for individuals, there's no real, standard or even ethical obligations placed on them to ensure that the information they provide to viewers is in any way true. So when you have online news media sources, understand that you have information. The information that's being provided is largely based on how their viewers will receive it, how favorably their viewers will receive it, how controversial it is, how many clicks it'll get, how provocative it is. We all remember what was his name, Milo Yiannopoulos or something, that incredibly provocative, gay man who would go out and say some ridiculous things, and he'd joke that he's being provocative on purpose. Why? In order to get clicks. You can't trust online media sources. Why? Because they are intentionally trying to take people down the rabbit hole of the far right or down the rabbit hole of the far left. It's continuing to polarize politics in the United States. So the Forward Party ultimately would also be subject to that. The media in the United States has conditioned people to believe in either a left-leaning or a right-leaning. Yes, when it was just the mainstream media, when it was just televised media, they were the gatekeepers of information. That is true. That being said, because these organizations have some sort of ethical boundaries that they have to maintain, and I know with Fox News and Sean Hannity and others, we're seeing those ethical boundaries kind of no longer exist. But because as a company, you have some kind of ethical boundaries that you have to maintain, these companies, like again, in Canada, we have those, by the way. In Canada, there are laws, and I know Americans may not agree with, laws being passed on how the media can operate, but I do think it's important. These companies or these news agencies have certain obligations, certain ethical obligations, and certain standards of practice that they had to maintain. In online news media, they don't have any of it. So whether it's the Young Turks, the Majority Report, Ben Shapiro, the Daily Wire, I think is what it's called, Breitbart, or any of these news agencies, remember, these places are a business. Their number one goal is ultimately to make money. And because their goal is to make money, they're going to provide whatever they think will get clicks so they can get advertisement donors. So if we take all of these issues and put them together, a third party in the United States, I don't believe it will work. And the reason why it will not work is because at the end of the day, it's only going to be Republican light or Democratic light. Because the media in the United States has conditioned people to believe, and I am also including online media, they've conditioned people to believe or to see the world through a lens of right and left. And that's not going to change with a third party. The polarization problem in the United States is largely because of the media. And yes, I'm also including online media into that. We have a society, a capitalistic society, that rewards entertainment over information or over truth. It rewards reception and provocation and controversy over truth, for lack of a better term, I suppose. So would I like to see a third party in the United States? Sure. I think the United States would fare much better from a fourth and a fifth political party, because then what that'll do is it'll ensure that all the votes from one political party aren't siphoned while the other political party is left alone. And I think the more political parties you have, if you have a fourth or a fifth, it's far less likely that one party, one existing party, is going to have an overwhelming leverage over the other existing party should a third party enter the race. But for these reasons, I don't think a third party is a good idea. Let me know what you think. If you disagree, agree, I'd be curious to hear what you think. These are just my thoughts. Thank you for listening. Have yourself a great day. Okay, bye.